Lindsay referred to General Gordon and the loss of his life in Khartoum, trying to put down what in today's language would be called a Muslim terrorist uprising, led in fact by a religious leader, the Mahdi, who was fighting for the liberation of his country from British imperialism. And when General Gordon was martyred, William Morris, the great socialist and thinker in this country, wrote in his newspaper publicly, "I felt a sense of relief that an imperial chief and an imperial army had been defeated, and my full support and solidarity was to the people of Sudan and those fighting for them." In other words, why I start with this point is that people whose armies are fighting in other countries have no right to determine the leadership of the struggle in those countries that is fighting these armies. That is not our job. That is not the job of people in imperial countries. Obviously, we would all like to have National Liberation Front armies like the Vietnamese. You didn't get them before the Vietnamese, you haven't had them since. And to use that as an excuse, as some in formerly in the anti-war movement do, to say we can't support these struggles is unacceptable. The second point which needs to be made is that one of the most important things the Stop the War Coalition and the anti-war movement, I remember we weren't this coalition then, but some of the people in this room will remember when we organized a meeting the very week of 9/11, that very week in Friends Meeting House, to explain what was going on, to say how this would be used, and to stand firm. And again I bring that up, is every time a new imperial war is waged in the name of so-called humanitarianism, a few more people peel away. And it happened with Libya. Now, most of us, many of us here and elsewhere, have no time for the regime in Libya. But the task of removing that regime, as we argued in the case of Iraq, our position has been consistent, is the task of removing these regimes is the task of the people in those countries. And sometimes they win. And sometimes the people win, and sometimes they lose. Unfortunately, that's the way of the world. When we lost, when people we supported lost the battle, we didn't sort of say in the 60s or 70s that the Chinese should invade Indonesia, where nearly 2 million communists had been wiped out by a CIA coup. No one said it, or the Soviet Union. No one argued like that, because we know that defeats are possible. The notion that these defeats can be made into victories by imperial intervention is a total and complete farce, as we are watching today in Libya, which is why I notice very few people are calling for a military intervention in Syria. The Syrian opposition is not calling for it, to my knowledge. The last time I spoke to some of them, no, we don't want foreign intervention. The Yemenis are not calling for it. The Bahraini people didn't call for a foreign intervention, but they got it. And no one talked about it again. Pogroms took place in Bahrain as the Saudi army and its mercenaries went into Shia quarters and dragged them out. And this was a movement which began in the square in Bahrain, chanting neither Sunni nor Shia, we are Bahrainis, we are Bahrainis. Who sectarianized the conflict? The Saudis with the green light given to them by the West. That's what happened. So on one thing, our movement has been very firm: no under any circumstances, do imperial interventions anywhere in the world. And we know how images are manipulated. What is done? We should have realized that, how they did it in Kosovo. People get worked up. People are all human beings. No one likes people being killed. We don't either. But that is one thing. You then have to think of other ways to help people. Not to call on Western armies to go in, whether it's Iran or whether it's Libya or whether it's any other country. Can't be done like that, and it never works like that, because it disrupts the organic flow of a popular movement with its victories and its defeats. Now, I want to make 2 points about Afghanistan. One is that this war has been going on for decades and decades, and the Afghan people have not known any peace now for longer than the First World War and the Second World War and the Vietnam War. And no people on this earth should be subjected to this bombardment and these killings and these tortures, regardless of who. I found an account soon after the Second Afghan War waged by the British in Winston Churchill's book, My Early Life, which I thought I'd share with you. It's late one night in 1897, soon after the Second Afghan War, and a Pashtun tribe with whom the British Empire wrongly assumed that they were not in dispute with, did a stealth attack on them, on the British encampment, in the cover of darkness, and they were outraged by what they called the treachery. The guerrilla attack cost the British Indian Army 40 officers and men, as well as many horses and pack animals. Winston Churchill was there as a young subaltern. And he writes that to his great delight, the commander of the operation, just wait for his name, Sir Bindon Blood, Sir Bindon Blood ordered an immediate retaliation. Churchill joined General Jeffreys in the punitive expedition to chastise the truculent assailants. But interestingly enough, what Churchill wrote still applies today with different technology. But he was, you know, an honest, straightforward imperialist. He made no bones about it or didn't try and cover it up with bullshit language. He said the chastisement was to take the form of marching up their valley, which is a cul-de-sac, to its extreme point, destroying all the crops, breaking the reservoirs of water, blowing up as many forts as time permitted, and shooting anyone who obstructed the process. Very clear, very simple. What has changed is the technology and the rhetoric. Helicopter gunships, drones instead of bayonet rifles. Humanitarian explanations and lies instead of Churchill's straightforwardness. It was a colonial operation, pretty classic one, as these are. Have no doubt about it. When I wrote my book on Iraq, people said it's a bit exaggerated to call it the recolonization of Iraq, but what the hell was it? What the hell was it? Who now controls Iraqi oil? Who is now sitting in Iraq? And here again people said, oh well, at least they've had elections. Well, Hitler could have organized an election in occupied France during the Second World War. Would that have been acceptable too? When you have countries occupied, what do elections mean?